Greetings everyone, my name is Dr. Jason Freeman and I'd like to welcome you all to my channel. Great science fiction presents to us worlds that are both alien and familiar. Worlds that are based on where we currently live or have lived and projected out to the most logical or extreme outcomes.
Lead them to paradise.
And one thing that great science fiction does extremely well is warn us about potential futures that can leave us in extreme peril. I mean like existential peril, like we're up out of here. Using several books that I've read over the years, I will highlight 5 warnings that we've consistently seen within science fiction but seem unable or unwilling to heed. Warning number 1. The potential of colonization from beyond.
Data, report. We appear to be caught in a temporal wake.
Captain, Earth.
The atmosphere contains high concentrations of methane, carbon monoxide, and fluorine.
Life signs?
Population approximately 9 billion. All Borg.
Humanity has been broadcasting our radio waves into space for over a century. And since 1974, we've been intentionally broadcasting our position in the universe in the form of the Arecibo message. Future generations may deem these behaviors to be naive and reckless depending on whether these messages are received and responded to by intelligent civilizations with the intention to colonize. The Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, which begins with the novel The Three-Body Problem, puts a modern twist on the consequence of humanity's unfortunate encounter with a technologically advanced alien species. But for some older, more accessible books with the same basic premise, I would recommend The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells and Childhood's End by the great writer Arthur C. Clarke. The War of the Worlds depicts aliens who see the Earth as being ripe for conquest, and who use their technological superiority to attack and conquer a humanity that is unaware of their existence. In many ways, this mirrors the conquest of the Americas by European powers, including the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the English. An unaware populace is set upon by an aggressive invader who possess weapons the likes of which they have not seen. But similar to the fate of European powers, when they first tried to invade African kingdoms, local diseases wreaked havoc on the invading troops. Childhood's End presents a different scenario in regard to colonization. In this case, aliens come seemingly peaceful, but in the end they have interests that they don't necessarily share with the local population. Not to give too much away about the ending and the twist within the book Childhood's End, but in a nutshell, we see a similar scenario to what we see in the book Things Fall Apart between the British and the local Nigerian population. Both books deals with the concept of assimilation, of what happens to local institutions when they're undermined by a new, seemingly superior power, and what ultimately happens when you give up your personal autonomy, the control of your destiny, for the promise of, some type of prosperity.
I hope you can trust me the way I trust you.
Welcome to the golden age of man.
Warning number 2. The risk of humanity trying to create life. Similar to the Arecibo message, genetic engineering has been around since the 1970s. In 1973, biochemists Herbert Boyer and Stanley Cohen made E. coli bacteria resistant to the antibiotic tetracycline by inserting DNA from another bacteria which already had this resistance. The potential for genetic engineering is immense and is still being learned, but the potential for danger is immense as well and was clearly laid out in the book Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Published in 1990, which is the same year the Human Genome Project began, the book is about a corporation named InGen, founded by the billionaire John Hammond, who has created a preserve where dinosaurs have been cloned using the latest genetic engineering technology. But as often happens, the best laid plans of mice and men oft go awry. Shout out to Robert Burns. The dinosaurs run amok and eventually escape the island. In many ways, this is a modern day retelling of Mary In many ways, this is a modern day retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where humanity tries to create life, and the question is, should we? Spoiler alert, probably not. And both these stories are warnings to humanity that the potential things that can be achieved through science are immense, but at the same time, the potential dangers are also immense, and it takes caution, foresight, and a bit of luck to avoid science ultimately becoming our undoing. Warning number 3. Losing our democracy and personal freedoms for the sake of real or perceived personal safety. Benjamin Franklin famously wrote, "Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." This parable is a core idea behind the story Ender's Game, which was written by Orson Scott Card and published in 1985. Side note, I bought this book back in, I think, the 1990s. This is actually a very book right here at a book fair, and I've been a fan of Ender Wiggins and Ender's Game ever since. In the book, the Earth is attacked multiple times by an insectoid species that comes to be known as the Formix. Gee, I wonder how they found this. And in response to these multiple attacks, the Earth has formed a one world government that's headed by one leader known as the hegemon. Now, nations that don't want to yield to the hegemon or to this new government are essentially forced to yield through things like coercion and even military force. This book clearly illustrates how democracies can fall in the face of real or perceived threats and be replaced by totalitarian governments. This is a pattern that we've seen over and over again historically, and if we're not careful, we're likely to see this repeated yet again. Warning number 4. The dangers of nuclear proliferation. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, a young Russian naval officer named Vasili Arkipov was commanding a small flotilla of Russian ships in international waters. All of a sudden, U.S. ships began launching depth charges to force a Russian submarine, which Arkipov was on, to the surface. However, to the credit of U.S. forces, these ships weren't trying to destroy the Russian submarine, rather these were just warning shots. What the Americans didn't know, however, was that the Russian submarine was armed with nuclear torpedoes, and the Russian commanding officers had authorization to launch them if they believed they were under attack from the United States. The frazzled captain of Arkipov's submarine, mistakenly believing they were at war, ordered the nuclear torpedoes to be launched. However, to the credit of the Russians, there needed to be authorization from 2 other senior officers on the submarine, of which Arkipov was one, before the torpedo could be launched. The second officer agreed to launch the torpedo. But lucky for us and all future humanity, Arkipov recognized the charges were warning shots and calmed down the frazzled captain, who eventually decided to surface the submarine, averting a nuclear war in the 1960s. Showing great foresight, the book On the Beach, published in 1957, so before the Cuban Missile Crisis, and written by Neville Shute, the book basically plays out what would have happened if, say, someone like Arkipov didn't step in and avert a nuclear war. Basically, the nuclear war takes place, obliterating basically everyone in the northern hemisphere with a few survivors, but then those in the southern hemisphere have to wait for the fallout to reach them until they eventually died of radiation poisoning. Even in 2025, decades after this book was published, we're still facing the same threats laid out in the book. Russia and NATO forces are at odds over the Ukraine. India and Pakistan are pointing nuclear weapons at each other. North Korea, another nation hostile to the United States, possesses nuclear weapons and ICBMs with the capability, in theory, to reach the US mainland. And then there's Iran, another nation hostile to the US, with a nuclear program that could produce weapons with the capability of striking the United States or even another of their enemies, Israel. So, on any given day, a misunderstanding between any of these nations can make On the Beach go from science fiction to science fact. Warning number 5. The risk of a global pandemic. As a planet, in 2025, we're only a few years removed from one of the worst global pandemics in human history. Now, science fiction has been warning us about the potential dangers of a global pandemic for decades, if not longer. For example, the book The Stand by Stephen King, which was published in 1978, gives a scenario where a weaponized version of influenza devastates the human population. However, I would argue that no science fiction book does a better job at describing the spread of a global pandemic more than the book World War Z, which describes the spread of a virus that turns people into zombies. The book, published in 2006, tracks the spread of a disease from a remote village in China to the rest of the world through immigration, human trafficking, and the illegal organ trade. Similar to the 2020 global pandemic, the infection spread quickly, far faster than authorities can adequately respond. The book shows disparities in responses to the pandemic and even shows the US, a global superpower, floundering in its attempts to address the pandemic, not unlike its response to the 2020 pandemic. And even now, we're failing to learn the lessons that were taught by the book and by real life, that we should be proactive, not reactive when it comes to global pandemics. Because frankly, if we let the wrong one get out of hand, we might be really seeing The Last of Us. Now, if you found that video interesting and or informative, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, please share this video. And if there are other warnings that are being given to us by science fiction that we're still failing to heed, please tell us about them in the comment section below. Thank you all for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day.